You had a great piece in DCReport.org, kind of x-raying the South Carolina results. And maybe we can start there, and then I want to get to the Trump money, because you were ahead of everybody on a prediction around this money. So please, let's start in South Carolina.
Well, the New York Times headline online about the South Carolina vote Saturday was "Big Win for Donald Trump." There were similar headlines in papers I checked all across the country and other news services. No, that's not what happened. 40% of Republicans voted for Nikki Haley. Now, Trump won. He got 3 votes for every 2 she got, but 40% of Republicans aren't supporting Nikki Haley. So let's see, about 40% of Americans are Republicans. 60% means that only about 24% of Americans are backing Trump when it comes to actually voting at the voting booth. You don't win elections unless you broaden your support. He has a very solid base. They're never going to leave him, even if he's convicted on all 91 felony charges. Some of them may, but overwhelmingly they're going to stay with him. But he is vulnerable. He is a weak candidate. He lost in 2016 by over 3 million votes. He lost in 2020 by over 7 million. And he's going to lose by more than 10 million, I predict, this time around. Now, he can still get back to the White House if he wins the right states. There are 13 states in the Old South and the Midwest that are in play. And that was who will determine who goes to the White House, not the popular vote.
Yeah, sadly, this system is set up it's really geared toward the GOP at this point. And so it was set up that way to protect slavery. The purpose of this in the beginning, the 3/5 of a person clause that one of the framers of our Constitution, James F. Wilson, came up with, and a number of other constitutional provisions were all there to allow a union between slave and non-slave states. And that legacy from the 18th century has never been fully corrected. Well, and now there is a major political party incentivized to never touch it. The GOP is just in the same way they're not touching a lot of things, specifically representation. For example, they'd have electoral college votes, et cetera. So they don't want to break a system that's working so well for them. Now I want to get to the Trump money. So as he has more and more judgments, and you've detailed quite beautifully all of the different judgments he has and how they compound interest, et cetera, he's going to have to come up with some money, David, and then you've made a prediction that I haven't seen anywhere else, and now it seems to be, it would seem to be the likely eventuality. I wonder if you could get into that.
Well, what I predicted is that there's a high chance that Donald Trump will file personal bankruptcy before March 12th. That's 13 days away. Because on that day, in the E. Jean Carroll second defamation case, where the jury awarded over $83 million, if he hasn't either put up the money to the court in cash or gotten a bond, some financial institution guaranteeing the payment, and they have to really guarantee it. If he loses on appeal, the court money will be taken immediately, and they will then have to go try and collect from Donald Trump, who is notorious for not paying his bills, delaying, and everything else. If he files personal bankruptcy, which Rudy Giuliani did in December and Alex Jones, the conspiracy theorist, did more than 2 years ago, what he would get is delays in the proceedings. The moment you file bankruptcy, all civil matters against you stop for at least 45 days. Donald's goal is to get past November 5th. Now, it'll cost him a fortune, $87,000 a day in interest in the New York case, if he does this. But that's not his focus. His focus is, I want back in the White House, because then he thinks he can fix everything. And after all, he's promised to round up people, to prosecute people who haven't committed crimes, or he doesn't dislike them, and to become dictator on the first day. He says he'll give it up on the second day. Right. My wife is 24 years old, too.
Well, by the way, and just to that point, I mean, he did go after people. You know what he did to Vindman and the Vindman family after that impeachment?
Well, he did a Michael Cohen. He had Michael Cohen over a book put back in jail, and the judge held this was an improper violation of Cohen's First Amendment rights. So it might seem odd that Donald would file personal bankruptcy. And let me be very clear. Donald has never filed bankruptcy. There's all these things on the meme. He filed bankruptcy again and again. That is not true. In 1990, with the aid of the New Jersey casino regulators who were violating their oath of office, something I covered intensely during that period, he got his bankers to let him out of $1 billion of the $3 billion of debt that he had. But he didn't file bankruptcy. This was casino regulators taking a major New Jersey employer's side against out-of-state bankers. Not a hard political choice, but a terrible legal choice. Then he created a publicly traded casino company, the only publicly traded company he's ever had. Under his watch, it went bankrupt 4 times, while he extracted over $83 million in money. And I think that's a low number. That's what they had to disclose. There are other ways he could take money out that weren't disclosed. And then he was paid essentially to go away. And the company went through 2 more bankruptcies, and then it shut down. And his Taj Mahal casino is no longer a casino. His Trump Plaza casino is gone, and his Trump Castle casino is owned by somebody else. But filing personal bankruptcy won't even be hard for Donald to explain to his followers. You know, he can say, listen, I'm as rich as ever. I'm worth billions of dollars. I'm very rich. But, you know, the deep state Marxist fascists, they forced me to do this. They made me do this. And you know what? If they succeed, they're going to come take your house. They're going to take your 401k plan. I'm doing this for you. And those people will buy it because look at all of the lies they've bought so far.
Let me double back, David, to the distinction you've made. You're suggesting that the bankruptcies that we've heard so much about through the years, they were corporate bankruptcies, they
Correct.
were business bankruptcies, so he'd siphon all that money out of it, and then he just declared bankruptcy.
And then he'd leave the carcass behind for other people to clean up. And this is a key thing to understand about Donald Trump. And if you read carefully, as I've done, and analyze his own books that he had people write for him, but they're working off his, comments to them, Donald Trump is not a wealth creator. A wealth creator has a business. It accumulates more than its costs, and over time, the owner or owners get better off financially. What Donald does is acquire a business, start drawing all the money he can out of it, as he goes on, stiffing vendors, stiffing employees, stiffing the government on taxes, and letting the business collapse. And then he says, I was so smart to get out at the right time. This is, frankly, very much like what's known as a mafia bust-out. Some guy gets in hock to loan sharks or illegal gambling operations. The movie Goodfellas does a great job with this. They take over your bar. They order all sorts of liquor and steaks and other stuff in the back door. They then take them out as soon as the delivery guys leave. And then when it's all over, they torch the joint. And that's what Donald did, except he didn't torch the joint.
Yeah, he left it to others to kind of just close it down.
Yeah.
There's something happening with this case, the criminal case over the Stormy Daniels hush money, that you can tell us in a way whether or not this is unusual. On the unusual scale, a gag order is being sought on Trump ahead of time. Is this something that's typical, and what exactly do they want?
I think in my career, which goes back to 1966, I've written one time in the past about a gag order, and it was over a defendant who was just crazy. I don't know how else to describe him, and ranting on and on and on. I mean, he wasn't legally crazy, but he was, like Donald, just out of control. Donald has been doing things that are intimidating witnesses and making people not want to serve on a jury. We saw in the case of the 2 women who sued Rudy Giuliani in Georgia, people came to their house and threatened them, and law enforcement came to one of the 2 women and said, people are going to kill you. You have to get out of your house. And so Alvin Bragg, the Manhattan District Attorney, wants a limited order on Trump. He can criticize Alvin Bragg all he wants. Alvin Bragg, by the way, has 24-hour-a-day police protection because of all the threats on his life. An enormous number of them have just been revealed in court. And as does, a bunch of judges and other people. And what he wants is an order that Trump may not talk about the other prosecutors. He may not talk about the judge or the judge's staff. He may not talk about potential witnesses. And while the names of the jurors would be known to Trump's lawyers, they are absolutely prohibited from transmitting any information about them to anyone else, and they won't be given their addresses. Although, frankly, finding people's addresses isn't that tough to do. But I think actually this is a necessary action, and you're going to see it in all of the prosecutions as they get close to trial. And one last thing to remember, Donald is screaming, this violates my First Amendment rights. When you are a criminal defendant out on bail, you don't have the same rights. The judge could say, fine, Mr. Trump, if you're not going to go by the rules, I'm going to remand you, that is, hold you in custody until your trial. And that happens a lot, where people violate the conditions of their freedom. Donald Trump is a criminal defendant. He is not an entirely free man. He's not been convicted of anything, but during the process, the system is designed to make sure that we can watch you and we can lock you up if need be. As, by the way, just happened with the Russian agent in the Joe Biden alleged bribery scandal from Ukraine. Turns out the FBI's confidential informant, who was on their payroll for 10 years, turns out to have close connections to and regular contact with Russian intelligence, which of course is a terrible story for the FBI. And I suspect there's an agent or two who's been having one of those really prestigious jobs involving counterintelligence who's about to find himself in Missoula, Montana.
Well, and then it's a bad look for the GOP that essentially hung their entire impeachment case against corrupt Joe Biden on this FBI informant. Now, they still want to proceed with that case.
They doubled down.
Yes.
Well, they learned the lesson from Donald Trump that Donald was taught by the notorious Roy Cohn. Roy Cohn was the lawyer for Senator Joseph McCarthy, and then after he left the government, for all sorts of mobsters and celebrities and Donald Trump. And he taught Donald the three basic lessons. Delay any legal proceeding. If law enforcement comes after you, if anyone else comes after you, they're corrupt, they're dishonest, you're a decent, hardworking person. And thirdly, relevant to this case, never acknowledge the slightest error or mistake. Double down, triple down, quadruple down. Once you have said it, it never changes. You never back off that, no matter how obvious it is that it's ridiculous.
I mean, it's worked. I mean, it's quite remarkable. And you see a little bit of it on the GOP side now, as you suggested, being adopted by by members of that committee, Jim Jordan and the like. There's Donald Trump and Roy Cohn. And I think there's a pretty good documentary called Citizen Cohn. Which,
yes, there's a very good documentary. There's a feature film that Nick von Hoffman came from his book. I thought that was called Citizen Cohn, but there's a democracy. There's a documentary. It's called Where's My Roy Cohn?
Oh,
Donald Trump wanted the Attorney General of the United States to be his personal Roy Cohn because he thinks the Attorney General is his lawyer, not the people's lawyer.
Yeah, it's a remarkable thing, and the GOP has seen its efficacy, and they've adopted it. It seems, David, moving forward, as we've seen with this impeachment proceeding. There it is. Where's My Roy Cohn?
Yeah.
Maybe that's the movie that I saw. I forget.
Well, I'm in that one.
Oh, are you? Okay. Well, you're in anything with Trump, you're going to be in. That doesn't help me distinguish because you're in a lot. Let me ask you just the last thing when it comes to the Trump money. I just always like to review exactly where we are. He has this huge judgment. You've talked about how the interest is going to compound. You've predicted ahead of everyone. You think that there'll be a personal bankruptcy declared. Now, that will, again, just review for us, that will cocoon him a bit, or it will in some way inoculate him. How does it affect his need to write a big check?
Well, one thing, interest in a civil judgment doesn't compound. It just adds. The judgment is fixed, and then each day he owes. In the case of the civil judgment, we just issued $87,000 a day.
Okay, very good.
Okay, so Trump files bankruptcy. He gets an automatic stay. Everybody trying to collect a debt, the police officers from the Capitol suing him over January 6th, et cetera, all those civil proceedings stop for the moment. And that's because the principle of bankruptcy law is to try and extract as much money as possible for the creditors, and if possible, sustain the enterprise. When it's a corporate bankruptcy, in Trump's case, he's the sole owner of his businesses, so it really doesn't matter. There'd be no point in his filing corporate bankruptcy because he's personally liable. Now, here's the really scary scenario to think about. Trump may find somebody who will put up the roughly $540 million that he has to pay in the two cases. Who would that be? It's not going to be any major New York bank, because he is prohibited from doing business with any bank registered in New York State. So the Community Bank of East Keokuk, Texas, doesn't have the money to make this kind of loan. All the big banks are there. All the banks who could make this kind of a loan are there. He might find a wealthy individual, actual billionaire, unlike Donald, here in America, who would put up the money. And he could turn to a foreign source like MBS, the de facto ruler of Saudi Arabia, who gave his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, $2 billion to manage, even though every advisor to the royal family in Riyadh said, don't do this. These people don't know what they're doing. They're charging you too much in fees, etc., which made it clear this was a political favor for things that were done for them during the Trump administration. And Donald, when he announced almost 9 years ago, he came down the staircase at Trump Tower. What did he say? I am so rich. I'm worth more than $10 billion. I don't need anybody's money. I don't take money from lobbyists. I don't have to raise any money to run for president. That allows me to be completely free of influence and to represent you. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but that was the message. Think about having a president of the United States who owes a foreign government or some billionaire over $500 million, the leverage that person would have over them. Now, Trump might turn around, if the Republicans control Congress, and try to get a law passed to pay off his loans. And in Florida, there was a bill introduced to have taxpayers pay Donald Trump's legal bills. So that not beyond the possibility. Just the key thing to keep in mind is Donald Trump is fixated on a single date, November 5th, 2024. As long as he gets to November 6th, it doesn't matter to him. He figures he'll work everything out.
The companies that he runs that are him, as you say, during this period of bankruptcy, will they still adhere to the court's decision? And that is to say they'll be run by independent, they'll be taken essentially from the Trump people.
Yes. Donald is no longer running his businesses. He has been removed for the time being. Now, an appeals court might change that. I think that's unlikely. But for the time being, the company is being overseen by retired federal judge Barbara S. Jones as the monitor. And previously, Trump and his sons had to report large money movements after the fact. I mean, she doesn't want to hear about, we paid the vendor for delivering whiskey to one of the golf courses. They don't care about that. Big money movements. And she reported that after sending in accountants, that they had violated the court's order and had done all sorts of improper money movements. So the judge's decision now says no big money movements without the advance approval of Judge Jones. In addition, and I think this is the most significant part of the ruling, Judge Arthur Engoron put in someone he called a special independent compliance monitor. Basically, somebody who reports to Judge Jones, who is going to independent compliance director. That person, as a practical matter, is going to run the company, not the day-to-day business, but at the executive level of the company. And Donald will still get, if he had a draw that he took or a salary, he's probably still going to get that. The sons, if going to get their salaries. Ordinary business is going to go forward. People can still go play golf because the object is not to ruin the businesses, it's to maintain them. But he will not be able to, as the lawyers say, or bankers say, hypothecate. He won't be able to borrow money against the assets without the advance approval. And who he borrows from, therefore, is going to be subject to this approval, I suspect, if any of the business assets are pledged. And I can't imagine even MBS, who is such a ruthless man that he had 39 Saudi citizens beheaded for the crime of praying for a better government. So this was 10 years ago, 2014. Beheaded for the crime of praying for a better government. I can't imagine he would essentially give a signature debt like your credit card to Donald Trump for over $500 million. But then again, who knows? There are a lot of things the Saudis want from us. You know, they want nuclear materials and technology, which, by the way, would allow them to build a bomb to blow up Israel. Who knows? But
I mean, it might be a futures bet, as they say in Las Vegas, when you're betting on the future. You know, this guy. It's just and it's kind of a rounding error, probably, to MBS. I mean, right.
Anybody who owns a country, you know, whether you own Kuwait or Saudi Arabia or Bahrain, you know,
that's a good business to get into, David. You think?
They have family businesses that we call countries, but the thing I would worry about is, given how much people like Ted Cruz and Elise Stefanik and others have kissed Donald's ring, if he were to borrow the money from the Kremlin, from a Russian oligarch, from MBS, from dictator Kim, not that he certainly doesn't have the money in North Korea, I'll bet you they would justify that. They wouldn't say this is an outrage and a horror and our national security is a threat. They would go, well, he was forced to do this. You know, this is what happens. That would be
always an argument like that.
That's scary.
I like that you mentioned national security, and now we're finishing up. This is our last minute with David K. Johnston. But, you know, I remember at the beginning of the Trump administration, his family could not pass background checks to get security clearance. He bigfooted it and got them all top secret security clearance. But the truth is, one of the reasons, and as I've read, I think in one of your books, that you can't get that clearance is if you're compromised financially in some way that is beholden to a debt that you have with foreign governments, or even if you have big gambling debts, because they know that you're desperate to fill those debts. You could be selling government information, et cetera. In this case, you've got a guy who's trying to be president of the United States who fills those categories of those who would be insanely bad security risks.
You're exactly right. And here's part of the problem. We have so many people in America whose reading skills are so weak and whose understanding of how government works is so bad that our argument would go right over their heads. Not everybody, but enough people. And remember, Donald Trump, what's he say? I love the poorly educated. That's because they're the easiest to fleece, because they don't have the knowledge of how things work or should work. And so we should be very, very worried about where Donald's going to get this money if he does. And if he doesn't get it, filing personal bankruptcy, getting the right lawyers to muck up the system, eventually it could all go to pieces for him, but he's focused on November 5th. If he can just delay everything till November 5th, doesn't have to be exposed as somebody who, as I've been saying for years, isn't a billionaire and never was, that's what he's going to do, because if he can get back to the White House, then he thinks he can make this all go away. And frankly, I think he can, if he becomes, as I have said for 9 years, and he just said, first day I'm going to be dictator.
He clearly worships at the Church of Authoritarianism. I'm going to we'll link to your latest pieces in DC Report, and love reading your stuff, and your takes are just so great. And now the world wants you, so I feel very lucky that we get you on Tuesdays. You've met your moment, David K. Johnston. Great to have you here. Thank you so much.
My friend.
Okay, David K. Johnston, everybody. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.